Hello and welcome to Fuse, the global podcast from the PRCA. This is the podcast where we explore the evolving landscape of global communications, where we bring together leaders from public relations, politics, business, academia, and media to spark new ideas and ignite innovation. My name's Dan Gold, and earlier this week I was fortunate enough to speak to Shayoni Lynn. Shayoni Lynn is the CEO and founder at the multi-award-winning behavioural science communications consultancy Lynn Group. She is a fellow of the CIPR and PRCA, listed in the PRWeek Power Book, where she was recognised in the top 5 PR leaders outside of London. Shayoni has received the Mark Mellor Award for outstanding contribution to the industry, and in 2023 she was included in the Innovator 25 EMEA and Global 15 watchlist by PRovoke Media. Shayoni is the chair of PRCA Cymru and sits on the PRCA Council. Shayoni, hello and welcome to Fuse.
Hi Dan, lovely to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm really interested in how you got to the position you are in and what inspired you to really take that deep dive into the world of public relations, communications, those creative arts, but the integration of science. What was your inspiration as a child to get you to where you are today?
Well, my inspiration as a child was completely different. So my parents, my dad's a doctor. I'm from India. The focus is you're either a doctor, engineer, or lawyer. And I was the first person in my family to go into the humanities, which people thought was nuts. My teenage years and beyond, coming into my master's education, was as a journalist. So I was practicing journalism in India and then in the UK. And like many good journalists out there, I decided to move into this wonderful and often weird world of PR and communications.
Welcome to the dark side.
Indeed, as they say. And it's been about good old 15 years that I've been doing this, more than 15 years, actually. But in terms of your question of how I ended up in applied behavioral science and communications, it was, I suppose, over the past good 10 odd years, if not more. Yes, certainly 10 years. I was building quite a data-driven program in my previous role, where I was head of communications for alumni relations, fundraising, and strategic partnerships at Cardiff University. And it was quite a data-driven program, very focused on measurement and evaluation. And I suppose the natural transition was looking at behavioral science and the applicability of that into the program. And lots of people ask me, what was that moment in time when you got interested and you decided to go down this route? And I really don't remember. I do remember falling into it through whether that was a talk or a book. I'm not quite sure of that exact pinpointed moment, but I do remember being fascinated by that integration of psychology, economics, and potential application into communication. So I started self-learning, which many of us in the applied field are self-taught, and using some of those insights back into my program in a very introductory and rudimentary manner, looking at very basic A/B testing and basic diagnosis of behaviors. And even then, I could see very quickly the impact into the program and the results that it was driving. And that motivated me to further learn and further expose my thinking to behavioral science principles, to the point that I journeyed into the world of behavioral science and the community therein, and was very, very happily welcomed by many, big names in the business who provided a lot of mentorship, I suppose, to me, and helped me think through the lens of strategic and robust behavioral science and the application into PR and communications. So I know I'm very lucky to have colleagues in both the Stratcoms world, but also in the behavioral sciences. And I suppose, driving the program in Cardiff University, which was generating quite significant results for the sector. And I wanted to look to see where I could take my career. And I'm based in Cardiff in Wales. And since I left India, I've just lived in Wales. I love Wales. I am an honorary Welsh citizen. And I refused to, I suppose, leave Wales. And one of the my options were limited before the pandemic, and so looking to do something for myself through the lens of consultancy, but eventually with the aim of establishing an agency proposition seemed like the natural pathway. That was back in October 2019 when Lynn was incorporated. And I think, right proposition, right time with the pandemic around on the horizon that no one saw coming. We were due to, I suppose, uh, my profile within the industry and the public speaking I was already doing in this space. Lynn was seen as a solution during the pandemic. And the work we did, which was very much in the health services, spoke for itself, generated quite significant results. And word of mouth was fundamental and instrumental in the growth of Lynn. So yeah, I think that's sort of the journey from when I was in India as a student reporter, all the way through to that transition into PR and comms, and then establishing what I now truly believe is the future of our profession is the integration of scientific thinking and rigor into creative communications to drive real world results.
The thing that kind of stands out for me when you talk to people about the behavioral sciences is the magic question, the single word, the three letters, why. It's the why of everything, which I thoroughly enjoy. And the other element, talking of why, you relocated from India, you made your way to Wales. You sound as proud as anyone I know who lives in Wales. And it's that sense of, I'm very proud to be here, to have my life here, to have my work here, to be a part of this community. So with the temptation and the large corporations and the organizations that are all hubbed around London, the question I will ask you, taking the first part and the second part, why not London? Why not post-pandemic go, do you know what? Yes, I've got all this here, but there may be other opportunities there. Why not London?
It's such a good question. And I go back to what you said because I'm proudly Welsh. And I am very proud to have built a business in Wales that's been recognized globally, that operates globally in a very short period of time. And I think, we in the regions and nations often complain, and we have been complaining for several years, of the focus on London as this hub and often at the sake of other areas within the country. And I suppose because of my my leadership in both CIPR and PRCA, and having had those discussions at the back of my mind, I was quite adamant and stubborn and naive in all parts to insist that I do this in Wales. And I was quite lucky because when I set up Lynn, not knowing the pandemic was around the corner, I set it up as a remote business. So and one of the reasons was to reduce overheads, but also to be able to attract talent from across the UK. I certainly know that when you are located in a particular area, region, nation, wherever, you're sort of limited in the talent that you can secure. And I really wanted to open up the gateway to talent from across the country. And being a remote business made sense. And of course, through the next few months with the pandemic, that very quickly became the norm. And how I did laugh, ha ha ha. But and now we're at the other end of it, where everyone wants to go into an office. But I think, yeah, so for me, I'm really proud to be Welsh. I'm very proud to have demonstrated it is possible to be a very significant player in the marketplace without being London based. Does that mean London is not important? Of course not. And I travel to London pretty much every other week. So I feel very much part of the London fabric as I do of the Welsh fabric. And indeed, London has been very welcoming of me and Lynn. But it's not just London, being in this marketplace, in the economy and the geopolitical space that we're currently in. It's about being in all of the hubs in the world if you want to operate in that manner. So I equally travel to Europe. I equally travel to the US, and we're working now in Africa. So there's a lot of spaces that I need to ensure the presence is there, but I don't think you necessarily have to be physically based there to be able to service clients within those geographies.
So from 2019 to now, how do you go from you working in your location and then scale the organization, making sure that you've got those footprints? How do you expand and build a team? What was your approach, and did you bring behavioral science into it?
I didn't have an approach, frankly, because I think the growth was driven by demand. So we grew exponentially through the pandemic because we were offering something that was needed and not necessarily available in the quantities that would have, I suppose, been helpful to clients. So we were one of a very handful of players in the marketplace that were providing the solutions that we do, not just in behavioral science, but then also in mis and disinformation strategy through the misinformation cell that we set up 2 years ago as the first such solution in PR and comms. So the growth was very, I suppose, reactive. It wasn't necessarily planned growth. It was to keep up with the demand. Coming out of the pandemic, looking at next year, which is going to be such a crucial year, as we know globally, with 40 elections comprising 41% of global GDP and 42% of world's population represented. What does that look like in terms of the business that we are driving, and where do we go beyond that? So we have taken a breath this year, if you will, to really reset and refocus how we want that growth to be, because that growth was exponential and it was so fast paced. It's very hard to keep up that pace of growth. So we've looked at our business internally. We've refreshed all our policies. But I also think it's about having the right people around you. So I was very fortunate to in the very early days and beyond, be guided by a set of really experienced set of hands in my non-exec directors who really helped me transition from a primarily public sector experienced professional into agency world. I never worked agency side before. So having the likes of Stephen Waddington, David Gallagher, and Andy West was crucial in me, plugging those knowledge gaps I had, but then also surrounding yourself with the right team. So for example, my managing director, Alice Cardigan, who is literally an operational guru, has helped bring so much more rigor into the business. Her background is big agency. So, she's brought that big agency thinking and sort of distilled that into what is a smaller agency, but very fast-paced, fast-growth agency.
Okay, you kind of dropped a seed and I'm going to go and pick it up. You mentioned the Lynn Disinformation Cell. What is it and how did it come about?
So it's the misinformation cell, which was snappier when we launched. So 2 years ago, so September, 2 years past, 2 years gone, I suppose that focusing on disinformation made sense to us because with the behavioral science proposition working through the pandemic, one of the key areas that we were looking at consistently was trust. And how do you build trust? How do you build trust in an age of reactance and resistance and hesitancy? And a lot of behavioral science techniques go into building said trust. And so the misinformation we saw in the pandemic was naturally an area of interest to understand what drove it, what strategies were being deployed, and how were they affecting audiences into building new beliefs or cementing their existing beliefs in much more in some cases, very radicalized manner. So we saw an opportunity. We created the cell. It was the UK's first commercial anti-disinformation service for PR and communications, and it was done to help in two things. To, like with Lynn's core proposition, provide academic rigor into the solutions that we were offering. So plugging that gap of academic literature and findings into application in practice. So that was one area we wanted to look at because there was a burgeoning body of literature and discourse in this space through the pandemic, and we wanted to see the applicability into communications. through very robust frameworks and methodologies. And the second thing was to offer support to PR and communications professionals who didn't really understand what was happening and still don't understand what's happening in the world of mis and disinformation, and try to shift their thinking from being sort of reactive to, well, firstly, to acknowledge the scale of threat, which I think we have done, then to stop being reactive and move into a much more proactive mindset. And then the third is to really equip themselves and their programs with the cutting edge thinking and knowledge and tools to create resilience within programs. So they are using the same or similar methodologies and tactics that disinformation actors do, but they're using that for good to help create programs that are resistant to manipulation. And they're not going to be 100% resistant, but they have a better chance if those academic literature studies models can be integrated in a better fashion into PR and communications programs.
Do you think that the industry has really learned that bringing in knowledge from academia, bringing in experience from different areas will really strengthen the industry? Or do you find that just some, maybe a little stuck in their ways, whether it's in-house or you experience from having seen organizations having maybe stumbled and repeating the same errors over and over again?
I think that's a big question. I think, it comes back to some of the behavioral nuances that we have as practitioners, and so the heuristics that we deploy when we make decisions. And in a capability gap, which we do have, certainly in behavioral science, also in disinformation, as an industry, we don't necessarily properly understand either the behavioral sciences or disinformation to be able to deploy advanced and sophisticated approaches to it. In a capability gap, it then becomes easy to be inert. Becomes easy to follow what we've done before, so status quo bias, and it becomes easy to, I suppose, even suffer from things like confirmation bias, because you see people around yourself and your teams or your colleagues who are deploying similar approaches, and therefore that must be right. So some of this can be diagnosed behaviorally, but I do think that there is a marked shift in how the industry is looking at both behavioral science and disinformation. Certainly since I founded Lynn, we've seen the CIPR, for example, establish behavioral science within their strategy. We know the PRCA takes this very seriously. Lynn's growth speaks of itself. To have worked with the types of clients globally that we have demonstrates that there is, clients are willing to buy into a service. But I think when you're selling services like behavioral science solutions or disinformation strategy solutions, they have to be robust. And I think clients can often see through the spin if they're not. And therefore, I think, before I started Lynn, I was often told, oh, there's no money in research solutions and comms. We don't make money off that. It's the creative that pays. And well, we've demonstrated there is money in research solutions if they are meaningful and if they drive the results that clients seek. So I think there are reasons why the industry might behave sometimes in the way that it does. I do feel that there's a shift in thinking. I think I certainly know that we get tons of inbound requests, whether that is for client, whether that's for work, or whether that's for training. We have a lot of people within the industry who are keen to learn more. And I think we need to try and create systems that help our practitioners not just learn, but then apply that. So often, you might have, and I've seen this firsthand, really well-read colleagues, specifically in-house, who want to make a difference, who really want to apply these principles, but they are limited in the environment they work in, where their senior leadership want them to go down a tactical route. So how do we create systems to help colleagues work in a different way, not just give them the knowledge and then expect them to do. So I think it's a fundamental question, not just of the individual capability, but I think it's also about the systems that we work in and how we can influence those systems to better allow us to be creative, truly creative in this case, and often counterintuitive to drive results in my case at Cardiff University, I was able to do that because I was driving results. So every piece of new approach that I took into the program, I was measurably demonstrating the impact from that to then enable the next level of buy-in from my senior leadership. So, but there's fundamental problems in the industry, as we know, which boil down to not being able to articulate objectives or measure and evaluate. So it's just a bigger problem.
Before we get on to measurement and evaluation and the dreaded history of the AVE and how for some people it still exists, how it still exists, I have no idea. But before we get to that, and let's leave that package just there for a second, the role of AI in disinformation and misinformation. I speak to people every single day. I've worked with the tech sector and in medtech for years, and just seeing the slow march forwards and how, a lot of different industries looked at AI or machine learning in that period, and they really went, well, it's pie in the sky. That's a tomorrow problem. We're not going to worry about it. And now it's a today thing. I wouldn't say it's a problem. I think there are definitely the opportunities and there are the challenges ahead of us. But in terms of the misinformation, the disinformation around it, how it can accelerate and perpetuate on behalf of bad actors, where on earth do we stand?
I think that's a very good question. I think it'll be useful to articulate the difference for your viewers and also your listeners. So to be clear, disinformation is the intentional proliferation of false information, and misinformation is the unintentional spread of that information, and it can be without malice or agenda. And why is this important? Because I think that for misinformation to exist, disinformation narratives have to exist in such a way that truly resonates with populations at scale, and in a way that makes them believe it and share it. So since we launched the Misinformation Cell, as I said, we've been at that sort of cutting edge of translating academic research into actionable intelligence advisory. And I think, what we find before I go on to AI is there's still, whilst, more and more conferences that I'm attending is addressing mis and disinformation, certainly as we're walking into 2024, which is great. But we still, as a sector, we're still so focused on how we react to false information. Whether we block it, delete it, hide it, whether we fact check it. Fact checking is such a big thing that people are really focused as the only way to combat this, and it's not. It has its place, but it's not the only, and often, and so in some cases, it's not even the necessary approach. It's not that magic bullet that we think it may be, and it's still very reactive and not proactive. And I think, as with inoculation in vaccinations, preventative action is far more effective and cost effective than being on the back foot. So I think, in terms of disinformation and AI, particularly, what we need to acknowledge. I mean, I was in a session the other day, and someone said, basically to the effect of AI creating disinformation wars. And I must be clear, AI aren't creating any wars. There are human beings behind every single piece of disinformation campaign that we see. And I think what people often don't necessarily understand, whether in our industry or outside of it, is that disinformation is an industry. It's organized, it's sophisticated, it's monetized. There's a very clear agenda by both state actors and organizations and businesses to disrupt and polarize our society. And especially when we're going into 2024, that becomes an extremely, extremely important part of the geopolitical landscape that we are now going to witness change, and we will see it change as we walk into these 40 elections. AI, on the other hand, I think, has the potential to do so much good. It has the potential to create efficiencies. It has the potential to have real partnerships with practitioners to create outputs that are far superior to what we could have done as individuals and groups. And I think it's that responsible application of AI that I want to focus on, because the irresponsible application of AI, which is where disinformation actors are using and weaponizing AI to create under the radar solutions that will further proliferate at scale disinformation narrative, disinformation campaigns, which we will see happening as we go into 24 and these 40 elections, because literally the future of the world is at stake next year. Because the way we vote will change everything. It'll change everything from how we respond to the next pandemic to how we respond to saving this burning planet that we're currently living on. So I think it is important to acknowledge that AI is a huge threat. AI does not work independently as of yet. AI is driven by human beings, and there are disinformation actors, whether they're state or business or organizations, I should say, who are driving AI development in a marketplace that is created to cause harm to individuals, communities, and society in general. But AI can also be deployed to fight that disinformation. And I think the more we learn about AI, the more we are not overwhelmed by it, the more we don't see it as a threat, the more because it's the progression of AI, the scale has been so fast, right? It's not even been 30th of November is going to be 1 year since ChatGPT came out. And within that, we've seen GPT 3.5 and 4 and 5's on the horizon, and custom GPTs. And if media reports are to be believed, we've got QStar, we've got the start of AGI. So it's moving so fast. If practitioners don't learn it now, understand it, and embed it, it's going to be too far gone down the line. So AI is not the threat. I think AI can be a solution or a friend. It's like with all science, it's how you deploy it.
I totally agree with everything you've just said. And I think one of the things that I really struggle in articulating to people is that when we look at the good or bad intent of people, they've always used tools, whether it's been propaganda and materials through war, or it's been disinformation around things that may be harmful to our health and trying to set their stall out. It's just that we have a tool now which can do it at scale and actually do a deep dive into that space where they can really truly identify the audiences that they're trying to target that message to. And on the other side, as you've articulated way better than I ever could, these are tools which, when people are educated on how to use them, how to apply them, how to understand the benefits of them, they can be so incredibly powerful to make the workplace and our lives better. I have a question for you. I'm going to pull that box back from over here. Anyone who's listening won't see me moving this invisible box, but it's the box of measurement. It's the box that I'm going to open up and take AVE out of and throw on the floor and stamp aggressively on. So you've created the Lynn framework. Explain how that works for your organization and clearly for your clients.
So it's a 5-phase framework. It's a proprietary framework that we developed at Lynn, and it's called the Lynn framework. It is a blend of strategic communications, behavioral science, and now disinformation strategy. And it's bookended by behavioral science, because at Lynn, everything we do is powered by behavioral science. So what we start with behavioral science and we end with behavioral science. So the framework has 5 phases. It starts with research and insights, and that is where we diagnose a problem. So we don't see ourselves at Lynn as, PR, comms, marketing, advertising. We instead see ourselves as problem solvers. So we look at what is the problem we're trying to solve, who are the people we're trying to speak to, what are the behaviors we're trying to create, maintain, influence, stop, what are the barriers to those behaviors, and that's the diagnosis side of it. And we look at not just the informational, but the structural. We talked about systems, the cognitive, of course, heuristics, biases, and wider psychology, experimental psychology. And then also looking at social, because social norms play a huge role in how we communicate, how we absorb messages, and then how we act. Once we've diagnosed the problem, we will make recommendations for different intervention solutions. Communications is only one intervention solution. There will be a whole host of other interventions that might aid the change of a behavior, the creation of a behavior, such as policy, pricing, design, etc. And that is all parceled up in what we call the behavioral diagnostic. That diagnostic is as I said, is primary, and it informs then phase two, which is the development of any campaign or any onward work from that diagnostic. Once phase one is research insights, phase two is development, phase three is what we call the rapid test phase or experimentation. And to our knowledge, we are the only UK agency that has embedded experimentation as a default to all campaigns. So all our campaigns go through a multi-pronged experimentation approach through both field and lab trials. Now, these are more sophisticated than A/B testing or surveys. They do often involve, especially within the lab setting, survey methodology, but they look to elicit statistically significant results from a set of creatives, content, or communication solutions, as well as better understand behavioral nuances within audiences on how they perceive some of that and how that makes them think, feel, and act. So the RTP insights will either confirm or deny our hypotheses, and it's okay to be wrong. So if in that phase we find that what we suggested doesn't actually land, we go back to the drawing board. And then if we assume that typically in the vast majority of cases our hypothesis does stand, albeit sometimes it needs tweaking, we'll make those adjustments within the strategy and other campaign elements. And then the fourth phase is activation. In activation, we have real-time monitoring embedded, so we can be very agile and very flex in changing to context and behavioral changes as the campaign moves on. And then the final phase in the Lynn framework is evaluation, because we're all about outcomes, not outputs. So truly trying to attribute the effectiveness of communication solutions to real world change, and being able to translate that into accessible client language that demonstrates not just the reach, engagement, and conversions from a campaign, which we are very confident we will deliver because of the methodologies that we have, but the real world behavior change as a result of that campaign. So what do I mean by that? If I'm driving a vaccination campaign, for example, and I have wonderful reach and wonderful engagements and great conversions to my booking page, but then I have no uptake on my actual vaccines, then for us at Lynn, that would be a fail. That would not be a successful campaign. So to be able to really connect the campaign outcomes then to business outcomes is fundamental. And sometimes it's easy in a way in terms of the data access and sort of the data interpretation, things like vaccines. It's harder in other cases, where we're working on more complex problems, especially in climate change, where, we're not looking at one particular behavior, but it's a suite of multiple behaviors that lead to an outcome, and that outcome might take a while to demonstrate. So yeah, there's a whole host of different types of measurement and evaluation approaches we have, but it's very much about outcomes and the real world change, not just about inputs and outputs and stopping at outtakes.
It is still so incredibly frustrating that so many professional organizations, so many strategists are still looking at the output from an organization for a campaign and the success and the reach and the numbers of that, but not going that next step and looking at the outcomes themselves. And I do feel that sometimes, just sometimes, my observation would be when you are in-house and you have a different position on the responsibility of the success of a campaign as against an agency. An agency sometimes will look at a campaign and go, okay, well, we've delivered everything. We got media coverage. Here's the evaluation, it's done. They're going to focus on the renewal, which is obviously important, and they will articulate that success or otherwise of that campaign. But when people are in-house, the behavior tends to be different, because the expectation from those in different roles within the organization will be, okay, well, you did a great campaign, but what's actually changed? Do you think, looking at the behavioral background to this statement that I have made, which is incredibly sweeping and it's of no criticism to anyone at all, but do you think the dynamic of the responsibility internally versus externally is significant?
I think it's a very good question. I think it is different. And, my background is in-house through and through. But also I think it's different in many different ways. So in-house, you are typically even in complex organizations, typically never resourced up to the levels that you need to be. You have vast swaths of work that you are doing with very little incentivization, which may be the case when you're agency side. You get incentivized more. And often you have leadership who don't necessarily drive you to demonstrate outcomes. They're very tactical themselves and they just want to demonstrate the volume of work in internal teams. And I'm not talking about directors of communications, I'm going beyond that, from in terms of exec leadership within complex organizations, because themselves don't have the understanding of what strategic communications is. And they believe that it is about the volume of content, the reach of content, the engagements or the eyeballs on content. And often, having been in those rooms, when you talk to those individuals, those senior leaders who often don't have that comms background, and demonstrate to them that you can make those connections back to outcomes, your business goals and objectives, they are often surprised because they don't see that connection as fluidly and fluently as they should. And I think in many ways that is our fault as a sector, because why is public relations so synonymous with media relations? Well, because we decided that that was an easier option. We decided it was easier to secure coverage, easier to demonstrate AVE and column inches, and easier to show the vanity metrics to clients to demonstrate effectiveness. We chose an easy route. And now we are bearing the brunt of it because we complain consistently about that seat at the top table. And so I think, we've created this bed for ourselves that we now have to lie in, and it is up to us to try and claw back and demonstrate actually coverage is only one part of the PR solution. And there's so much more than we can do. And often coverage may not be the solution. We've advised clients and said, you're not going to get what you want by going into the newspapers on this. This is not going to help you. Instead, you should look at X, Y, and Z. So I think there is a difference in in-house and agency side. Of course, there is. I think agencies, you say, Dan, that they, as part of renewal, will demonstrate the effectiveness of even said coverage, but that can also be quite introductory. And if we don't raise the bar agency side, how would clients get further educated into what is possible? Because I suppose the privilege that we have working in the agency world is that we have a lot more flexibility, we have a lot more variety, so we learn a lot more, we can absorb a lot more, and we can integrate that back in different client programs. And so we can constantly be telling clients, this is how you raise the game, this is how you raise the bar. And that is our job, because we have that luxury in-house practitioners don't. So I think in some ways it is down to the agency professional and the agency sector to help our colleagues in the public sector. Well, I speak of the public sector, but any in-house, specifically those who don't have a comms background, to think differently about communications.
Do you think that maybe, just maybe, we've believed as an industry, whether it's public relations, communications, marketing, the whole creative ad sector, do you think that maybe we've had it a bit easy in that we've self-reported on a lot of our success, and the outcomes piece hasn't necessarily been a part of it? And now when we look at the whole process, I'm looking at your process where you mentioned, it might not be as a part of the research that you've done when you've been through that it might not be a communication or a Marcoms campaign. It might actually be the pricing or other strategic positioning pieces within the organization to get that towards those outcomes. Is it that we haven't really had a level of accountability that we now truly have with the tools that are coming on board to ask those questions, and the behavioural science bit, which has been missing for so long, has actually become more and more important?
Absolutely. No, 100% agree with you. I think, we have had the luxury over the years to create the dashboards that we think would impress the clients and make us look good. But I think, as we're going through the cost of living crisis, going into 24, going into much sharper client outlooks where they will want to demonstrate effectiveness, which is outside of reach, engagements, and conversions. And, so what are you doing for me, agency, to help drive X, Y, and Z outcome? Measurement and evaluation suddenly is the top of everyone's list to upskill. And that's only right. But I think, the tools, clients now having access to tools, having access to AI themselves, will certainly push us as an industry to keep making us remain relevant, and also justify the fees that we seek. And I think, certainly when we work at Lynn, we don't just work in comms teams. We work with policy. We work with ministers. We work with clinicians. We work with actual stakeholders within the program to ensure that we are not just at the funnel end of the solution. Here's a policy, go sell it. We're going upstream, further and further up, to help design that solution, because fundamentally, if the policy is broken, it's not going to create the behaviors you seek. So how do we take that thinking into the design of a program or a design of a policy, and help and guide our clients, who should not just be communications practitioners? How do we help our clients think differently about the outcomes that they desire to have? And that's where I think the strategic council comes in, because very soon AI will be able to do all of the tactical bits. So where do we fit in? How do we have value? And the value comes from our intelligence and experience and advisory that AI will never be able to replicate, or not in the near future anyway.
So that brings me on to a next question, which is looking at where we stand now, and people who have been in the industry for a long time, or even looking at that next generation, those who are coming through, that talent who will lead us into the future, those future leaders. If you had a piece of advice for those listening right now, and those who are just considering getting into the industry with the established education programs, the established degrees around marcoms and public relations, what would you say to them to give them a competitive advantage over other people who are in this space, who may not be thinking about what is my next step?
I would say that you're in a much better position than we were when we started. Gosh, the world you're going into is scary. I get it. But you are in a better position to create more impact than us. But don't be too reliant on technology. I think we're seeing a generation that is so embedded in technology, and certainly AI. That's going to become so integrated into programs as those young professionals become the leaders of tomorrow. But AI should never be seen as a silver bullet or a magic bullet. It should be seen for what it is, a collaborative tool to help enhance our own performance. So don't dismiss the old world wisdom of, the theories and the frameworks. They're all extremely important. Absorb them, build on them, localize them. Don't feel shackled to a certain way of working, either which way. Feel free to innovate, and sometimes the opposite of a good idea can also be a good idea, as said someone very famous in our world, which is Mr. Rory Sutherland. And I absolutely believe in that. Like, being counterintuitive can give us a fundamental and competitive advantage in this marketplace.
And I'll just add to that, not that I'm anywhere near that stature, I would also add the lessons you learn through failing, they're not failures.
Absolutely.
If you actually learn the lessons and you then act upon them, though, that's critical.
I couldn't agree more. We always say at Lynn, no data is bad data. So we always look at things that don't work to understand why they didn't work, to then further inform our program. So yeah, absolutely, don't be afraid to fail.
One of my favorite quotes is from a chap I used to work for when I was in the agency space. And he said when one of his organizations had lost a significant amount of money over a misstep, it's like, this is investment. This is an educational opportunity. This is investing in education. Don't look at it the other way around. If you don't learn from it, you're out the door. But if you learn from it...
Correct. Yeah.
So that was one of my favorite quotes. And talking of quotes, or actually I'd like to kind of start to get some perspective into you, Shayoni, as who you are. Often on this podcast, we ask people about what their favorite book regarding their profession or their sector or their specialism is. I'm throwing that out the window. I'd like to go in a completely different direction, whether it's an author or a quote or prose, whatever it may be. What is a piece of creative material or a creator, writer, artist who inspires you and the reason why?
I don't know. I don't think I have one. I think there are, of course, moments in every year where you see some wonderful creativity coming to the door. I would say, well, I suppose this year, the thing that's energized not just me, but people in my team has been the resilience and determination of the communications teams in Ukraine. And to see how they have, alongside their president, of course, risen to a worldwide challenge like no other, and how they continue to maintain their uh, their honor and their purpose and their patriotism, has been truly inspiring. We at Lynn, we supported the team in Kiev at the start of the war with disinformation strategy services. So, and I know that was a really important piece to them, as they've said to us, and we feel very privileged to have had the honor. But since then, having met so many Ukrainian professionals who I hadn't, necessarily crossed paths with in the past, and then also mentoring someone from the Ukrainian communications side really has shows how big the world really is, and the scale of challenges that really people face versus the stuff that we often worry about. I really is, it's humbling. So I think the creativity, I suppose, the determination and the doggedness in such a positive way of the Ukrainian people has been inspiring.
In terms of, author or something
Yeah.
that you've read that inspires, what's in that space for you?
So I'm always I'm always asked about books. So I have my set list, which is why I said I wish you'd ask me. So in terms of what inspires me, I mean, I'll tell you about the books that I think people should read if they want to go down a behavioral science pathway. And I am sure people know about nudge, and they know about thinking fast and slow, but and probably Cialdini's principles of persuasion. But there's quite a lot of good in. I previously used to recommend Dan Ariely's work. I do not now anymore. You may or may not be aware of the circumstances that surround his own research. So strike that off. But I think there's quite a lot of really interesting, relevant podcasts out there that I think is much more useful to listen, because it absorbs latest thinking and integrates that back into some of those key pieces of literature, like Katie Melkman's Choiceology is a really good, relevant podcast to listen to. And the other newsletter that I recommend colleagues to plug into is Sam's Habit Weekly. Habit Weekly is a great weekly behavioral science roundup, and great for communications practitioners to dip into. So I think there's a lot of books out there. Don't just think that the world of behavioral science starts and ends with nudge. There's much more out there. There are things around weird communities. There are things about a lot of different bits of behavioral science, behavioral design, which is really fascinating. But yeah, I mean, once you go into the likes of, either whether that's Choiceology or Habit Weekly, they'll start sort of signposting you to other bits of content also.
Shayoni, time has got away from us, but before we depart, I'd love for people to be able to connect with you to find out more information. How could they do that?
Of course. So our website is lynn.global. So that's lynn.global. I'm on Twitter, which I will still call Twitter, at
Me too.
at Shayoni S Lynn. So that's SHAYONISLYNN. I'm on LinkedIn. You can find the business on LinkedIn, Twitter as well. But if you want to email me, just drop me an email. So it's shayoni@lynn.global.
Shayoni, thank you so much for joining us here on Fuse.
Thank you, Dan. I hope that was helpful and great to be here.
It's such an honour to have you here. And to our listeners, thank you so much for taking the time to hit play. Please do share this with friends and colleagues and comment on our posts around the topics that we touch on. Please do subscribe to this feed. You can find out more information at prca.org.uk/Fuse. Rate and review the podcast. And of course, we've got some incredible episodes coming up.